The identities of more than 100 British officials, including those in the Special Forces and MI6, have been released in a data breach. That same breach that also inadvertently leaked the names of 19,000 Afghans who had worked with the British during the 20-year war in Afghanistan and had applied to resettle in the UK.
Now, the Ministry of Defence and Government blocked reporting of the mistake by using a super injunction, which also stops people talking about the fact there's a block on reporting it. And that was only lifted on Tuesday. Now, former MI6 Intelligence Officer Matthew Dunn joins us now to talk about this and hopefully to shed some light, really, on the sort of risk that this leak imposed. Now, there's been so many things revealed and so many elements to this terrible data breach. And one of the latest is that there were 100 British officials, including those from your previous profession, Special Forces and MI6, that were on that list. First of all, what sort of risk would that kind of data getting out pose to people like yourself, and how would it impact?
I think the risk is really twofold. First, there's the risk to the officers themselves. And within that, I think, again, two layers. First, the potential release of officers who are serving in the likes of the SAS. That is sensitive information. But the release of the identities of officers who are serving in the likes of MI6, that is potentially catastrophic for those officers because those officers, understandably, are working in extremely sensitive positions. Their identities cannot be compromised. These are individuals who typically are working under alias cover in current positions, but also looking to do so going forwards. So extremely limiting in terms of what they can thereafter do. And also very, very crucial to this whole discussion is the potential compromise of MI6 agents, as we call them, foreign nationals who are working for us, who are accessing the secrets that we need, the top secrets that we need to protect the United Kingdom and our allies. So the whole breach, as has been reported, could be a massive, massive security concern.
So the breach, bad. What about the imposition of the super injunction? At the very least, we understand that was done to try and keep people safe, and action taken subsequently to try and keep people safe. But would it have prevented people in the field knowing? Would it that they were even at risk? What level would your understanding be of how that restricted those protecting themselves?
I must confess I am slightly confused on the subject because, as you've alluded to, a super injunction to what end? If the information is out, then there is compromise. The people we don't want to know, the identities of our secret agents, I mean, they already know. So what is the point? Presumably the super injunction is purely an internal domestic UK issue to stop, I presume, tittle-tattle within political circles. But from an operational perspective, I simply cannot see it serving any purpose whatsoever.
Right, so they wouldn't have been protected, those in the field, by the super injunction. It would the risk of the Taliban having the information, because of course it only relates to the UK. It doesn't stop global, does it? Information being shared. That it would have been useless, in your view, in that.
Yeah, I mean, if this is true in terms of how things were dealt with, I simply cannot see what purpose it would have served, because, as you say, if that information is already in the hands of the Taliban, the Taliban will then take action. The breach has taken place, so therefore the likes of MI6 and others will be into a firefighting situation, trying to rescue individuals, trying to rescue operations. So taking a very sort of reactive steps in play, a super junction is meaningless in the likes of Afghanistan or elsewhere.
Yeah, just on that, Matthew, it's what a real honour to have you here with us, by the way, former spy, and you've served in hostile environments. We're not allowed to say where they are, obviously, for obvious reasons. But looking at somewhere like Afghanistan, and from what you know from your experience, speaking to colleagues, etc., do the Taliban have the capability, do you think, of tracking down some of these operatives? Let's assume they do have this list. Some of them are claiming they've had it all along. Do they have the intelligence? Do they have the capability of tracking down these very expert intelligence officers, your former colleagues, anywhere around the world?
Well, I think we need to differentiate who we're talking about here in terms of the targets for the Taliban. When it comes to MI6 officers, for example, or UKSF Special Forces, these are grown-up individuals, highly trained, and they have support, the wherewithal to protect themselves and ensure they're not identified. But then what we're also talking about, and again, the bigger concern as far as I'm concerned, are the Afghan nationals, the people who, in many cases, have really bravely supported, helped us proactively during the war, the conflict in Afghanistan. The vast majority of whom are still in situ within a country, a very tribal country, a country that relies very much on communication being delivered through word of mouth and other communication means. It will be so straightforward for the Taliban to find individuals, even if they are, individuals who served as commando special forces on behalf of the British government. Right now, these are civilians, citizens living amongst their people. They're as vulnerable as anybody else, so they can be found.
Just finally on that, Matthew, what can the government do? The government will say, and previous governments say, there have been schemes to try and bring some over. We know, as a consequence of this leak, that some were fast-tracked over, but there are still, as you say, thousands still vulnerable and their families are vulnerable. What can the government do now? I mean, they are in the hands of the Taliban. We have no presence out there. Can the British government do anything at all to protect those civilians?
Well, I mean, we are somewhat after the event, to be honest, and I'm a little bit cautious here because it is straying into politics, but there is a line of argument that suggests we perhaps should have done more for these individuals historically, up to and including potentially getting them and their families out of danger. And it's important on the point of families to reference that because the threat isn't just to the individuals themselves. Retribution, retaliation, the way these things work, will be directed at the families and the extended families of anyone who's worked for us.
That's a horror. Look, we have a statement from the Ministry of Defence, a spokesperson saying it's a long-standing policy of successive governments to not comment on special forces. We take the security of our personnel very seriously, particularly those in sensitive positions, and always have appropriate measures in place to protect their security. In this case, though, of course, that hasn't happened. From your experience, if you were still in your role, what would you be shouting for? Would it be the individual not having their job anymore? We understand they still work there, but in a different department. Would it be, what would be the change that you would be asking for?
Well, as a case officer, as somebody who was running agents as I was, to borrow your phrase, I most certainly would be shouting because my priority would be to protect my foreign agents. So I would be, banging fists on tables saying something must be done. And I'm absolutely certain, guarantee that that's what, has taken place. There will be MI6 officers and special forces officers who've been operating in that environment alongside Afghan individuals. loyalty in play, and their priority will be to protect these individuals.
OK, Matthew, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you
Really
so much for your time. It's been a real honour and an amazing insight. Former MI6 Intelligence Officer, former spy Matthew Dunn, joining us this morning. Thank you. It's been revealed the identities of more than 100 British officials, special forces and MI6 agents were leaked in the Afghan data breach. A super injunction put in place to block the reporting of the mistake was only lifted on Tuesday, and it's only this week that we've been able to report on it.
The government's now facing calls to launch an immediate and full-scale inquiry. Labour MP and Treasury Minister James Murray joins us now. I assume, maybe you can confirm, that you, like many of us, only got to hear of this when the lid was lifted on that super injunction. Have you been able to drill down into detail? A first order's got to be those at risk, and we now know that there were some 100 names, including potentially SAS, MI6 officials, the British officials that were on that list as well. Claims also that because of this leak, there have been potentially hundreds of people who have come to harm. I think the figures of unsourced are saying around 56. What do you know? Has anybody come to harm because of this leak?
Well, you're right to say that, like everyone else, I'm becoming aware of these, the facts around the matter as information is coming into the public domain. And I think that the fact that there's 100 people who are special forces also on that list, really underlines just quite how serious this is, quite how significant this data breach under the last government has been. As you're just
finding out, presumably you were backing calls for an inquiry to get to the bottom of this and prevent it doesn't happen again.
Well, we definitely need accountability. This happened under the previous government. The Conservative ministers who were in charge at the time need to be held to account. And actually, the chair of the Defence Committee in Parliament has already said he wants to have an inquiry into this. And I hope the Conservative ministers from the previous government will cooperate fully with that. I'm sure they will. And we can get to the bottom of exactly what happened, because, we knew this was serious. And the fact that, as you say, 100 special forces were on the list as well makes it even more significant an issue that we need to get to the bottom of.
I mean, cost to life has got to be the first thought of everybody, hasn't it? But then, of course, for your department, the actual financial cost. I mean, 850 million could have been spent, they say, already on the removal of those people to keep them safe so far. And potentially, if the claims that those who were put at risk then sue, even greater cost to the taxpayer and coming out of your funds.
Well, you're right to point out that there's a cost of around 800 million in terms of the around 6,900 people who have resettled to the UK, initiated under the Conservative government. What we did when we came in was initiate an independent review of the situation. That's now reported, and on the back of that, the scheme has now been closed down. And the fact the scheme has now been closed down means that we will save about £1.2 billion, and around 9,500 people who would have come here or could have come here now will not. So we've decided, because on the basis of the independent review, which shows that the risk is at a low enough level, that we can close that scheme so that we don't need to continue that scheme. So that means that we're going to save that money and fewer people will come here. Now, obviously, we have a moral duty to people who stood by us in Afghanistan, and the broader programme has been really important. But the independent review that we commissioned when we got in shows that the risk level is now down to a low enough level, which means that we can close that scheme.
James Murray, we talk about Diane Abbott? She's been suspended by your party for the second time on the same issue, it seems. Now, it's an issue that she talked about racism. She wrote a letter to the Guardian paper. At the time, when she initially did this, the issue was, and a lot of people condemned it, and I would agree with this, that she didn't equate sort of Jewish prejudice to racism, and that caused all sorts of issues, and quite rightly so. But this time around, she's attempted to clarify that. She said that, that actually what she was trying to say was that colour racism is very different. And she has this time acknowledged that Jewish prejudice is racism. Was it right to suspend her the second time, do you think?
Well, look, what happened, as you said, there were comments made a while ago, which Diane Abbott apologised for. What's happened in the last few days, the comments which have now been broadcast that were recorded recently, is her making further comments on those previous comments which she previously apologised for. Now, we have processes in the Labour Party for handling issues like this, and it means that the issues are looked into through a proper process. Whilst that process is underway, the person in question has to be administratively suspended, and that's exactly what's happened to Diane in this case. Now,
Sorry, I just want to get to the book, so we're going to run out of time. Would you agree with her on that point that she's making, though, that when it comes to racism, yes, Jewish people suffer racism, Irish people suffer racism, the travelling community suffer racism, but when it comes to black people, people of colour racism is different. Would you agree with her on that point, first of all?
Well, what I was just going to say, though, is relevant to the question you just asked, is that when you have a process underway in the Labour Party and things are being looked into, it's right that ministers like myself, MPs, don't comment on it. You know, we want the process to conclude as swiftly as possible, but we shouldn't comment on it to get involved in that. So we have the processes now underway, and we want to let that play out.
You're allowed to have an opinion on an important issue like racism, though, aren't you? I mean, it's quite a simple thing.
Well, look, if you want to talk about racism more broadly, that's a different question, but you're talking about it in relation to Diane Abbott and her comments. And as I said, because she's now been administratively suspended so that those comments can be looked into, there's a process underway. In that context, it's not appropriate for me to pass further comment.
Next week, we're facing potentially 5 more days of what used to be called junior doctors. Now we're calling resident doctors' strikes. Wes Streeting met the BMA yesterday, and it's been reported this morning that one of the things he offered was writing off student debt for those that are training as doctors, which we know is a significant period of time, sometimes 5, sometimes 6 years. So we have no clear figures, but the sort of maths that we're talking about is that over the time, doctors will leave their study with £100,000 worth of debt. There's 8,000 doctors that are offered places. Did Wes Streeting talk to you about writing off potentially 800 million? And would you support it if it gets us out of the strikes?
Well, these are live discussions happening at the moment, so I'm not going to give a running commentary on the live discussions. But what I do know that Wes has said is that his discussions with the BMA have been constructive. You know, we've been clear that we're not going to give any more on pay because we've already made a settlement on that front. But he's discussing with the BMA other ways in which we can help working lives of resident doctors.
It was a running commentary. I understand that you don't want to do that. But have people talked to the Treasury, the Chancellor, you, about this idea of writing off this amount of money in order to resolve it?
Well, you're kind of asking the same question again, which is for me to give a running commentary, which I'm not going to do. But look, we don't want the strikes to go ahead. We've made amazing progress on our NHS pledges in the first year, 4.5 million appointments extra, getting the waiting list down, getting the NHS back on its feet, record capital investment. You know, the NHS is getting back on its feet. We want to work with the resident doctors and everyone in the NHS to continue to improve the NHS for the good of the British people, and that's what we're focused on.
OK.
Right.
James Murray, thank you very much for joining us, the Treasury
Good to talk to you.
Minister there.